As Eli walked into Tasha's family gathering, the last thing he expected was for everything to go silent and for his fiancée to slap him in front of everyone. Eli stepped out of the car, a little too aware of the time. He was 2 hours late. He had tried to make it on time for Tasha's family gathering, but traffic had been a nightmare. As he approached the front door, he could feel his nerves tighten. He knew how much Tasha valued punctuality, and today had been a disaster. He rang the doorbell, trying to ignore the feeling in his chest. The door swung open to reveal Tasha's cousin. She gave him a quick smile and stepped aside without saying a word. Inside, the house was filled with the chatter of people, but the moment Eli stepped into the living room, everything went almost quiet. Tasha stood across the room, her arms tightly crossed over her chest. Her face was set in a cold, hard expression. She didn't smile. She didn't greet him. She just stared at him as if he were a stranger, someone she didn't recognize. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. He had no idea how to fix this. He walked toward her, hoping to break the tension, to make things right. But as he got closer, it only felt worse. The room seemed to close in around him. He opened his mouth to say something, but his words felt weak, almost useless. "Hey, I'm sorry I'm late," he said, trying to sound calm. But even as he spoke, his voice lacked confidence. And then, without a word, Tasha took one step forward. In the blink of an eye, her hand shot out, and she slapped him. The force of it shocked him. The sound of the slap rang through the room, louder than he expected. Eli's body jerked back slightly, the sting on his cheek almost burning. He froze. His hand shot up to his face, feeling the heat where her palm had made contact. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The shock of it wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. She hadn't even said anything. Not one word. Just the slap. And the silence. Eli looked around, his eyes wide, expecting someone, anyone, to speak up, to say something, to break the tension. But there was nothing. The whole room was frozen. Not a single person moved. Not one voice broke the silence. He wanted someone to say something. To stop this. To defend him. But no one did. His heart pounded in his chest as he turned his gaze back to Tasha. She hadn't even looked at him after the slap. She didn't show any sign of regret, guilt, or even a hint of apology. Instead, she just turned away, walking back to the other side of the room, as though nothing had happened at all. Eli stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just taken place. The humiliation hit him like a punch. She had slapped him. In front of her entire family. And no one had said a word. It wasn't just about being late. It wasn't just about her anger, either. Something deeper was at play here. Something he couldn't fully understand, but something that he could feel. The anger in her eyes, the silence in the room, the way her family just stood by and did nothing. It all added up to something he wasn't prepared for. Eli knew, deep down, that he couldn't stay. He couldn't be in a place where something like this could happen and no one cared. No one even tried to help. Without saying another word, without waiting for her to turn around or say anything else, he turned on his heels and walked out of the house. His heart was still pounding in his chest, his thoughts a blur. He didn't look back. He didn't bother saying goodbye to anyone. He didn't care. He just needed to get out. Once outside, Eli pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen before he typed out a single sentence. "The wedding is off." He hit send, and the weight on his chest didn't lighten. It felt like he was making the only decision he could. The night passed without a reply. Eli didn't expect one. It wasn't that he wasn't hurt, but he knew Tasha. He had seen how she could shut down when things went wrong, how she needed time to calm down before facing anything. But deep down, part of him was already certain that the damage had been done. The next morning, Eli woke up to a message from Tasha. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I was just so angry, and I don't know why I reacted like that. I know you were late, but my family, they kept saying things about you. About us. It just made me snap. Please understand, I wasn't thinking straight. I love you. I'm sorry. Let's talk." Eli stared at the message, his eyes fixed on the screen. The words were a mix of guilt and excuses, but none of them hit him the way she probably hoped they would. He knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to explain her actions, make it sound like it wasn't really her fault. She blamed her family, tried to shift the focus away from her mistake and onto something, anything, else. The fact that she mentioned her family over and over again only made it worse. It's not my fault. It's their fault. You just don't understand how much pressure they put on me. Eli's heart thudded painfully in his chest. But none of it mattered. It wasn't her family who slapped him. It was her. And in the end, she made the choice. He stared at the screen for a few more seconds, then deleted the message without replying. Hours passed. Tasha kept texting, trying to get through to him. The tone of her messages shifted from apologetic to desperate. Eli, please. I was wrong. I was angry, but that's not who I am. You can't just end everything like this. I love you, and I want to fix this. You mean everything to me. Each message became harder to read. The more she begged, the more his resolve strengthened. He had tried to tell himself that there was something deeper behind her actions, that maybe this wasn't completely her fault. But the truth was, she slapped him in front of her family. The humiliation of it all was too much for him to ignore. Her words, "You mean everything to me," felt hollow. They were just words. And in that moment, they didn't change anything. The slap had already done its damage. The silence from her family when it happened spoke louder than anything she could say now. Not one person had stepped in to stop her. Eli took a deep breath and typed one final message. I'm done. He hit send, then stared at the screen. His finger hovered over the screen, but he couldn't bring himself to check if she'd replied. He was done. There was no going back. Eli turned off his phone and leaned back on the couch. The decision settled in his chest like a heavy weight. He wasn't angry anymore, he was just numb. The thought of trying to fix this, of going back to what they had before, felt impossible. The next few days felt like a blur. Eli didn't want to talk to anyone. He didn't want to face anyone, not even his friends. He turned off his phone to avoid hearing her calls, and stayed away from social media. The whole mess had left him drained. The slap, the way her family had reacted, the way Tasha tried to explain it all away, he couldn't wrap his head around it. He had loved her. He still did. But something had shifted. The way she treated him, especially in front of her family, had made him realize something important. He deserved more than that. Meanwhile, Tasha was beside herself. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had never hit him before. The fact that she slapped him in front of her family made her stomach twist. She didn't know what had come over her. The pressure from her family had been building up for weeks, maybe months. Her mom had been criticizing Eli's career, comparing him to the men her family wanted her to be with. Her mom's comments had gotten under Tasha's skin. Her family had never truly accepted him. They always found some reason to talk down on him, and over time, that pressure had started to get to her. When Eli showed up late, everything came crashing down. She didn't know why she reacted the way she did, but she knew it was wrong. That evening, after he left, she couldn't stop thinking about it. How could she have done that? She immediately started texting him, apologizing over and over again. She called him, but the phone rang and rang without an answer. When she realized that he wasn't replying, panic started to set in. She drove to his apartment that night, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She stood outside his door, banging on it softly. Eli, please open up. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. That wasn't me. Please, just listen. Please, talk to me. Her voice cracked as she said it, and she felt her tears fall. She didn't know how to fix what she had done, but she had to try. Eli had seen the texts, had heard the calls. Part of him wanted to forgive her, wanted to believe her apologies. But another part of him felt betrayed. How could she have done that? How could she slap him like that, in front of her family, without any hesitation? The shame was still fresh in his mind. Eventually, Eli picked up the phone. His voice was calm but cold when he spoke. I need some space, Tasha, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I can't just forgive something like that. You humiliated me. In front of your family. I don't know how to come back from that. Tasha was crying now. She wasn't the same confident woman who had slapped him earlier. She was broken. Please, Eli. I was under so much pressure from my mom. She's been pushing me for so long. Saying things like, what kind of man shows up late, and you can't trust a man who doesn't prioritize you. And in that moment, when you came in late, it all just exploded. I never meant to hurt you. Eli took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. I get it. I do. But I can't live in a relationship where my dignity is constantly at risk. I'm not going to just let that slide, Tasha. For the first time in their relationship, Tasha didn't have an answer. All she could do was cry, unable to explain or fix what she had done. In the days that followed, Eli kept thinking about everything she said. He tried to understand her. He considered the pressure from her family, the stress, the way she had been raised to put family first. Maybe, just maybe, her anger wasn't entirely hers to bear. Maybe it was the weight of expectations pushing her to do something she never would have done otherwise. But in the end, that didn't change the fact that she had slapped him. He couldn't forget it. He couldn't forgive it. And he wasn't going back. Days passed, and Tasha continued to beg for forgiveness. But Eli had made up his mind. The slap, the public humiliation, it was too much. Even if her family had been the cause of her anger, it was clear that she hadn't fully protected their relationship from her mother's influence. Tasha came to him one last time, pleading with all her heart. I'll distance myself from my mom. I swear, I'll get help. But please, don't leave me. I love you. Eli shook his head. I can't, Tasha. I've thought about it, and I can't move past this. Not after everything. The look on her face shattered him, but he knew he had made the right choice. Trust, once broken, couldn't be easily repaired. And sometimes, the pain of walking away was less than the pain of staying in a relationship that had already crumbled.